Good afternoon. It is 2:33 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in New York City. Hi, welcome. Let me know when you're joining. Let me know where you're joining from. Let me know what time you're watching this. Some of the friends come on live, others watch this as a recording. Today, I'm going to be doing something specific. So, I do anticipate and hope that people will watch this later because I'm going to be responding to a video that I watched. Dee Dee from Brown Girl Reading responding to someone else. So, Dee Dee made a video a couple of days ago reacting to Ryan's 2026 rules for reading. So, someone had tagged Dee Dee from Brown Girl Reading, and so they tagged her to respond to an article that someone else had written, sharing their 31, I think, rules for reading in 2026. And Dee Dee talked about it as inviting people to make it into a tag. So she didn't tag anyone specifically, but when I responded to her video, I left a comment. She said, you should do this one. I'd love to hear your responses. And so I thought about it. I said, yeah, I would like to do this. So the creator that she was referring to in her video is someone called Ryan Holiday, and he has a blog called, what is his blog called? I think ryanholiday.net, just his name, .net. And Ryan Holiday is an author and bookseller. According to his blog, that's what he says he does. His reading background is that he is an author, and he's also a bookseller. So he has a perspective on reading that is not mine. His perspective on reading is going to be reflective of where he is in the book community. And so he has some specific rules for reading, and he shared them as though at least some of them would be rules that you could adopt as well if you're a reader. And if you're not yet a reader, rules that maybe you could adopt to make your reading life much richer and much more fulfilling. I don't necessarily agree with his overall philosophy because he shared these rules as though it would be, for the most part, that they would make someone's life better, their reading life at least better, and not just reading life. Let me rephrase that. He shares his rules with the assumption that if you adopt his rules, you'll be better off for it. And I can't say whether that's true or not, and I don't think that there's any real way to test. But I will share my personal philosophy on reading and reading rules in general is that I just encourage everyone to read. My platform, my reason for being here on BookTube is to share my own reading experience with the hope that it will motivate you to read more. Not necessarily to read the books that I read, not even to read the books that I recommend, not to avoid the books that I love and read something else. Everyone has their own reading journey. And that's my encouragement to continue on your own reading journey. For some of us, we read for entertainment. For some of us, we read for education. For some of us, we read for inspiration. For most of us, we read for a combination of all of those things. Because even if we don't necessarily set out to read what I would consider the big like business text or philosophical text or historical text, even if we don't set out to read those kinds of books, we do get something from reading. And so we're all on our own reading journey, and it's going to look different for everyone, and it should look different for everyone. So I don't know that there is any set of rules that I follow and that I would tell anyone else to follow, except that if you already read, keep doing it. If reading makes you want to do something else, follow that path, follow that reading path. If you have been reading for entertainment and you love it and you feel like reading other kinds of books would be better for your life, then pursue that as well. We all have our own reading journey, and my encouragement, my rule is just read the things that speak to you, read the things that make you want to read. I would never tell someone that they should stop the kind of reading that they do and instead read other things. When I was in school, when I was in college, I spent a lot of my time, a lot of my reading time, reading scientific texts because that was what I needed to do at that time. And whenever I got an opportunity, sometimes even when the opportunity wasn't there and I have to create it, I would always look for something that I could read for entertainment solely, just fiction for the joy of reading, for the joy of immersing myself in someone else's story, reading about a culture or a time or an experience that is completely different from my own, because that is part of my joy that I get from reading, always has been and always will be. And so that would be my encouragement. Even if you are reading other things, whatever book speaks to you, whatever kind of book, whatever genre, whatever background of author speaks to you that makes you want to read, that is the book that you should be picking up. Your journey is going to be different at different points, different places in your life. And so that is my encouragement. So I say all of that as my preamble to Ryan's rules for reading. So together we are going to check out ryanholiday.net. Check out his blog post. I am going to try to share it in the comments. If you have an opportunity to check the comments, I'll put a link in the comments with the blog post. I don't know if it will work. I've never linked an article, linked an external article in a comment before. But if you're able to click on that later, when this actually goes live, when I'm finished, I'll be able to edit the description box and put it in the description box. So if you're watching this as a recording, it should be in the description box where you can go check out Ryan Holiday's blog post. So I'm going to go through the blog post and I'm going to respond to the individual rules, even though I've shared my personal philosophy. Some of what Holiday has to say are things that I agree with, like some of his individual points are definitely things that I agree with. So let's just go through them all at once. I hope you can still see me when I click off of the video. All right, here is Ryan's blog post. His About Me says, I am Ryan Holiday and I'm a writer and media strategist. When I was 19 years old, I dropped out of college to apprentice under Robert Greene, author of The 48 Laws of Power. I made a successful marketing career and went on to found a creative agency. And I'm the author of 10 books, including The Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, The Daily Stoic, Conspiracy, and Stillness is the Key, which have sold more than 2 million copies in 30 languages and have a following among NFL coaches, world-class athletes, TV personalities, political leaders, etc. I spend much of my time on a ranch outside Austin, Texas, where I do my writing and work in between raising cattle, donkeys, and goats. Okay, so that's his background. Let's find his rules. I think I may have shared the link to his actual page. Did I send the right one? Okay, I did. So I shared it in the comments again, just in case. All right, so here are Ryan's rules. And there, like I said, there are 31 rules. So I was originally going to make this a video that I edit, but it becomes a long video. So I abandoned that plan and just decided to do it live. So if I stumble over some words, if I stumble in my responses, forgive me, this is live. So here is Ryan Holiday's blog post. These are my reading rules for 2026. And I wonder why he says for 2026, if his rules are different for different years. Like, did he have a post in 2025 where his rules were fewer, more, different? I don't know. I'm just, like I said, coming to this because it was shared by Dee Dee from Born Girl Reading, and she was originally tagged by someone else. I think Always Be Reading is the person who originally invited her to respond to this. So thank you so much, ladies, for sharing this inspiration, because I think it is worth going into other people's perspective on reading and, maybe hearing someone else's or hearing some other um, opinions kind of disguised as rules might make you feel like your reading journey is not comparable to someone else. And I definitely wanted to jump on and say that is absolutely not true, because like I said, everybody has their own reading journey, and what we read and what we want to read and what we should read is purely purely for us to decide on, not anyone else. So here are Ryan's 31 rules, which he says by no means make a complete list, but if you implement even a couple of them, I'm comfortable guaranteeing you'll not only be a better reader for it, but a better person too. So that is Ryan Holiday's personal guarantee that if you follow his 31 rules, you'll be a better reader and a better person. All right, let's see. So Ryan's first rule, it is not enough that you read, you have to read well. Have a problem with that word well. You have to read well. You have to read the right books. What are the right books? You have to figure out how to process and retain and, of course, apply what you read. As Epictetus said, I cannot call somebody hardworking knowing only that they read. He said he needed to know what and how they read. He needed to know that their efforts aim at improving the mind, because then and only then would he call you hardworking. Then and only then would he give you the title reader. Um, that's interesting. That's interesting. It is not enough that you read, you have to read well, you have to read the right books. I don't agree that there is a specific list of books that everyone should read to be called a reader. There are lots of books. There are lots of books widely available. There are people who are professional readers, people who teach literature, and people who are from the background of some literary, like scholarly background, where I think they feel comfortable telling you what to read and how to read. And somehow we accept them. We accept their platform. We accept that they are experts on reading. But again, I don't think that there is any one list, that there's any one set of books that if you read those books, you will then be a reader. I think the quest of reading, the quest of looking for books that will enhance your life, that will make you better aware of the world around us, better aware of how people's lives are different from your own, be a little bit more knowledgeable about various cultures, whether they are real or fantasy. Just being open, being it's not even open, being being made aware of life outside of your own experience, I think is the real reason for reading. And whether that is from someone who we consider to be more successful on the journey that we want to be on, and we want to get advice from them, or a list of habits that we should adopt, or inspiration or motivation from them, because we want to see how they've done some things so we can possibly chart a similar track. If that is your reason for reading, then that's fine. But I don't think that there is any one list of books that you have to have read in order to be then called successful at reading. Personally, I have a list of books, classic and backlist TBR, that I have been working on finishing. I love a book list. I love when a book is mentioned that I have something to say in a conversation about it. That is my reason for following a list of books. We hear about the books that are on the Western canon. We hear about the classic titles, and people might recommend that you read them. But I don't think just having read them means that you are now a reader. I don't think that anyone should say that you are excluded from being called a reader just because you haven't read those books. Because again, these books, the books that are on the Western literary canon are Western. There is a lot of the world that is not Western, one of those what are considered to be Western countries. So if you are reading widely, if you're being exposed to different kinds of stories, whether they are real or fictional stories, whether they are stories that you are reading for principally entertainment value, but also learning to be more empathetic and learning how to be more objective because of having read those things. And I think that's a success of your reading journey. So yeah, I don't think it is not enough that you read. You have to read well. You have to read the right books. Um, As a statement of principle, I'm going to say I disagree with that, because it is enough that you read. It is enough that you read. And where you start off reading is not necessarily where you will go on your reading journey. And so it is enough. It is enough that you read. You don't have to read a specific list of books to be called a reader. You don't have to have read Anthony Trollope to be called a reader. You don't have to have read Marcus Aurelius to be considered a reader. If you read, you're a reader. The next rule is that you should always be carrying a book. I like this. I agree with this. He says phone, wallet, keys, as Adam Sandler says, the little check that you do before you leave the house, and book, and adding to it a book. If you bring one or have one loaded on your phone, you'll read it instead of using your phone. And I agree that it is good to have a physical text with you, something that you can read while you may have a few extra minutes, while you're waiting in line or you're waiting for an activity to begin. It is good if you have something that you can read. And a physical text is always better than electronic media, because for me, I know once I pull out my phone, even if the intention is to go read something, whether I'm reading it online, a free book that I can read on Project Gutenberg, or a download that's on my Kindle app on my phone. Once I've pulled out the phone, though, the fact that I have the phone in my hand, I may have the intention to go open up the Kindle app, but I see notifications and start responding to them. So it is better if I don't actually interact with the media at all. If my intention is to use those extra few minutes to read something, it is better if I just go to reading. So I always try to have a physical book or article or magazine or something with me that I can read. And I think that's a good principle to live by. Is it a rule? I don't know. The next is, if you're not reading with a pen, you're not really reading. I question the intention behind this, because this rule, as it is stated, has this comes with the assumption that you're reading your own book and that you are someone who you're comfortable with marking up your book because you intend to keep it for yourself, or you don't care to keep it in a pristine condition if you intend to pass it on to someone else. So this rule is very closely related to his next rule, which is that books are not precious things. It should look like you've read the book. Mark it up, fold pages, beat them up. And the next rule after that, which is spilling food on a book, is a sign of respect. So I'm going to treat these three rules as one, which is that we are seeing books for the utility, not the collection value, not the what would you say? Like, you're not considering the book as being more valuable because it is in pristine condition, which I think is something that you will care about if you intend to resell a book after you've read it. I know when I have read a book, sometimes it looks like it's not been read because I'm reading the book in a short time. I'm not necessarily moving around with the book all the time. So the book still looks like it's in really good condition, even though I've read it. It could be a book that I enjoyed. I don't necessarily have to have written anything in it. There are ways to take notes on your reading without actually marking up the text. And so I think Ryan's rules are with the assumption, or based on the assumption, that you want to write in your books, that you want to underline and make notes in the margins, that you want to ask questions of the book while you're reading it, and that you want to preserve those questions that you are asking inside the book forever. I don't think that that's necessarily everyone. I used to write in my books. I used to annotate some of my books, and I don't think that having written in the book makes me more likely to go back to it. And if it's something that I'm going to reread, I'm not sure that the next time I read the book, I would have the same feeling. So I don't know that I'd necessarily want those notes to be in the book in a permanent way. There are ways to annotate your books without actually making marks in them. You can definitely write on paper. You can use Post-its. You can tab the book. Or you can write in an external make an external record. A reading journal is really good for that. I have my journal right here. I don't necessarily write notes in my reading journal about the book until after I've read, because I'm more writing reviews in my journal, or, kind of um, an impression of the book after having finished it. But you could definitely write things down in an external source, or not source, in an external record, external journal of some sort, without actually marking up your book. If you intend to sell your book when you're finished, or you intend to give your book to someone and you don't necessarily want to share those notes, you might not want to read the book. I feel like this these rules as a whole, the three of them, are with that assumption that is not going to be the same for everyone. Also, if the book you're reading isn't yours, a lot of the books that I read have been sourced from my library. My library would not be happy if I brought back the book with food all over it. They would not be happy if I wrote notes in the book and didn't write them on post-its and didn't remove those post-its when I returned the book. So again, not every book that you read is going to be your own book. I think this is fine if that is your personal desire, to mark up your books and spill things on your book to show what you have experienced while the book was a part of your day. But I don't think you have to do that. I definitely would not say that that's a rule, because, again, I read a lot of books from the library. I try to keep them in as pristine condition as I can. And even for books that I own, I may be passing them to someone else. I may be giving them to someone. When I go to the little free library to pick up a book, I want to get a book that's in good condition. I don't necessarily want a book that looks really, really used. So if my intent is to pass the book on, I definitely want to keep it clean. So his next set of rules are about well, here's the rule. Forget the news. The best way to understand what's happening in the world is by reading books, usually old books. And he references a quote from Truman, which says, "The only thing new in the world is the history you don't know. Find a book about a similar event in the past, or read a really great author that writes fast." And I am inclined to agree with this, in that reading books gives you a perspective of the world that is going to be a little different from reading like a journalist's account of something that's happening in the world. Reading books, um, reading like nonfiction books about history, or personal accounts in form of memoir or biography, will give you some background of what was happening in a time and place that is going to be different from what you may hear on the news or by just watching videos of some sort. And of course, if you are reading memoirs, people will tell you not just what was happening historically, but also what was happening in a personal way while those historical events were happening. And you may be able to get more of the story than just what you would see on a news report. So I definitely encourage people to seek out biographies and memoirs for that reason. If you want to know what is really happening behind the news stories in a specific time, I think you'd be more likely to get the full story from reading people's personal accounts from that time. Historical fiction also gives us a little bit of an insight into something that may have been happening in a historical way, but also a way to um, examine those historical records in a more personal, even if slightly made up or novelized versions of real events. So historical records and historical fiction definitely show me some things that were happening, give me a like a it's like opening a gate into a historical time that I want to know more about, or might not have known that I wanted to know more about until I found this book. But it also becomes this gateway where you may become more interested and want to find other things to read, so you can discover more about these events. There is there's another rule that Holiday gives a little later down in his list, that I'll refer when we get to that rule. I'll come back here because I think it links to it. It's just not here It's just, it doesn't appear that way in the article. So let's move on to the next rule, which is rereading is the best way out of a reading slump or dry spell. And he says, I'm always able to get back into a groove by rereading some of my favorite novels. Honestly, the first time I read this article, this blog post, I thought all of the reading that he was talking about was nonfiction. So I really loved that this rule, in his explaining this rule, he actually shows that he loves novels, that he loves novels to the point where he has favorite novels. And if you explore his blog, he does give a list of novels that he recommends, which I love. I love seeing people, like I said, I love a book list. I love a book list. So he's definitely telling you that he loves rereading and he recommends rereading as well, because it is a way for him to, if he's not sure that he wants to read something, he can quickly dive into something that he knows he has read before and has enjoyed, and is confident that when he rereads it, whether he reads it in its entirety or reads a part of it, that it will be something that will probably make him just have that kind of experience with a book that he's looking for, and maybe make him more likely to pick up something else. I love rereading. I don't do it as often as I think about it because there are so many books. There are so many books that I want to get to. I have never ending TBRs. I own a lot of books that are still unread. I do want to get to new books, new stories. I want to have all the bookish conversations that are possible. So I want to read all the books that I can so that I can talk to you about them. It just doesn't leave that much time for rereading. But for a book that I have read before and know that I love, I'm confident that when I go back to it, I will have a similar experience. Either that I'll love it the same way, or maybe I'll even love it more. So I do know that I can reread, and I enjoy rereading at the occasional time when I pick up a book a second time. But yeah, I like that as a rule. So rereading, he says, is the best way out of a reading slump. I don't really have reading slumps. I feel like it's more, I know that I'm not in the mood for a specific kind of book, and so I have to find something else. So it's not usually that I don't want to read at all. It's that I'm looking for something different to read. Ryan's next rule is don't be a book snob. And I laughed out loud when I saw this on his list, because for the for most of the reading of the blog that I had done up to this point, I was looking at him, Ryan Holiday. I think you are a book snob, sir. But I love this because it shows a little bit of his humor. He says, don't be a book snob. I find myself sometimes reluctant to read the latest super popular book. That snobbishness never serves me well. More often than not, when I get around to those bestsellers, I kick myself. They were bestsellers for a reason, and they are great. Um, Holiday definitely has a different perspective on the literary industry than I do. He says he's an author, best-selling author, multiple books, especially in that business, like self-help kind of genre, um, motivational, inspirational genre. Regardless, he's an author. He says he's a bookseller. He has personal connections with other famous writers. So his in the literary industry, in the book community, is very different from mine. I am a reader. I have a bookish platform, but I don't have the same background as this person. So when he says the books that are bestsellers or bestsellers for a reason, I defer to him. He probably knows more about this than I do from that background. He knows more about the publishing industry and about, the choices that go into how books are sold and why they're sold and how they appear on the bestseller list. From my position, being um, outside of that in, I can only guess. I have my suspicions. I have read some things. I've heard some things that, you know, bestseller doesn't always mean that the books are the best of those books that are published right now. There's a whole industry behind that. There's a whole machine behind the best-selling list. But yeah, I think he's saying a book snob would be someone who avoids bestsellers because they want to tell you that they read different kinds of books. So I won't read the latest book that has been chosen for Oprah's book club or chosen for Jenna's book club because I'm above that kind of reading. Um, so yeah, if that's his definition of a book snob, I'm not, because I don't mind reading a book that is popular. As a matter of fact, I do want to seek out books that are popular because, like I said, one of the things that I want to do is I want to be able to participate in those bookish conversations. And so if the book is popular right now, it means that a lot of the people who are reading those books are people who I could be having conversations with. So why not read the book that is popular right now? If what I want to do is to be able to have a conversation with you, if that's the book everybody's reading, I kind of want to read it too. Anyway, his next rule is never read without taking extracts. And he talks about keeping a commonplace book where you capture quotes, stories, ideas, and observations that strike you. Like I said, have a reading journal. And in my reading journal, I sometimes will write down things about the book that strike me. So this is what my reading journal looks like. I have a little bit of I keep a picture of the book, and my first page is not completely updated. But like this is on the order of what I would write about a book. So in general, I'm writing some kind of response to the book. I may write like a 1 or 2 line summary of what the book was, but more so, I'm writing my impression of the book. If something happens specifically, like I want to remember a quote or something that the author did that was unique, I would write it down. But I'm not necessarily keeping a list of quotes in here. I used to keep a list or I used to keep a journal where I would write down rules and lists that I was getting from nonfiction reading, like more of those inspirational books. I think on the order of the books that Ryan Holiday writes. Um, I found, however, that while I was writing those notes down, I wasn't usually referring back to them. So I thought about what my reason was for writing those things down. And after a while, I stopped doing it. It wasn't necessarily an active decision. I'm never going to do this again. I stopped doing it. I stopped doing it and I started keeping up with my reading journal a little better. And I find that this is a little bit better of a record for the kind of reading that I'm doing right now. Again, different part of my reading journey, and that's okay. So Ryan is taking extracts of his reading. He's writing down his quotes and stories and how the ideas that he's reading in the book are being applied to his own life. That is good advice if that is the kind of thing you want to do, but I wouldn't say that that's for everyone. And it definitely might not be the kind of it's not the kind of record that you may want to keep based on the kinds of books that you are reading right now. So yeah. His next rule: if a book sucks, stop reading it. The best readers actually quit a lot of books. I'll tell you my rule on that. I don't DNF, what we call did not finish. I don't necessarily put a lot of books down and say I'm not going to read this. Unless the book is like really offensive to me, I'm more inclined to finish a book once I have started it. And for me, when I put down a book, it is because the book isn't really striking me right now, or I'm just not in a place where this book is the book that I want to read right now. So I may put it down for a couple of days and read something else and then come back to it. If too much time has passed, like more than a couple of weeks, months have passed, and I haven't gone back to the book, if I do intend to go back to the book, next time I pick up the book, I'm going to have to start again from the beginning. So it's actually in my best interest not to put the book down if it is a book that I want to come back to read, because the time that I had invested in the first reading the first like 20 pages and then putting it down and then having to come back and read those 20 pages again, that's time lost. So it's in my best interest, once I've started a book, if I intend to actually read this book, to just keep up with it. Again, there are books that once I've read a few pages, I know I don't want to come back to them. And so that is for me a clear DNF, and I'm not going to come back to it. But yeah, unless the book is something that's like personally revolting, I don't do that often. I don't do that often. But I know a lot of people say that if the book doesn't make you want to keep reading it, then you should put it down, because like he says, life is too short to read books you don't enjoy reading. And I agree with that. Um, I agree with that. I don't, I wouldn't tell anyone to subject themselves to reading 400 or 500 pages of a book that they don't actually want to read. So for me, if the book is not something that I'm enjoying when I'm 2/3 of the way in, I'll skim. I'll skim the rest of it so that I'll know how the story ends, so that I could see if there was a reason to slow it down and actually keep reading. Maybe a little bit of hate reading. But I'm more inclined to finish a book that I've started, unless it's something that I just can't read for whatever reason. For him, he says the rule for quitting a book is 100 pages minus your age. So the older you get, the less time you should give a book to prove itself to you. And I could see that. So I'm in my 40s. I should be giving a book like around 50 something pages, and then seeing if I want to continue. I think that's a good habit. Good writers and good books are not hard to read. And he says if the a student once bragged, his context is that a student once bragged that he'd made his way through the tense writings of Chrysippus. You know, Epictetus told him, if Chrysippus was a better writer, you'd have less to brag about. So there are some texts that are celebrated as being just very difficult to get through. Like James Joyce's, is it Ulysses? Is like that, where people talk about how difficult the book is to get through. I haven't read it, so I don't know. I can't weigh in on that specific one. But I don't think a book has to be difficult for it to be meaningful. I think a good writer should be able to communicate what they want you to get from the book in a way that you can get it. If the book is very complex, maybe that's not the book for you. And again, this idea that there are any specific books that everyone should be reading, I reject that as a truism. So yeah, I think you should read the books that speak to you. I think you should read the books that you want to read. If there's a story that you want to get through, then I think you decide how much energy, how much of your time you want to invest in reading that book, because reading a book, especially a big book or a difficult book, is a commitment, and you get to decide how much of a commitment you want to make to that book. I have heard about some of the difficult books, and I haven't read a lot of them because I'm not in a place where I want to make those commitments, and I think that's fine. So similarly, his next rule is that a long book must justify itself, and he mentions the author Robert Caro, who he says he's read 6,149 pages of that author. He's read over 4,000 pages from Ron Chernow. And he's not bragging, but he says it's a credit to the authors because it was a joy to spend all those hours with them. There are a few authors that I have spent a lot of time with, and the only reason I've spent that amount of time with those authors and continue to seek out their books is because I enjoy them. So, yeah, read the authors that you want to read. And if a book is really long, and you haven't read anything from that author yet, maybe you want to read something shorter from the author so you know kind of what to expect. Yeah, a good book shouldn't the book shouldn't have to be 700 or 800 pages for it to be considered a good book. Some of the best books that I have read have been short. Okay. His next rule, what's the book that changed your life, is a question that will change your life. Ask people you admire for book recommendations. And he quotes Emerson, who says, if we encounter a man of rare intellect, we should ask him what books he reads. Excuse me. I agree with that. I love that. I love getting recommendations from other people, even if I don't necessarily follow all the recommendations. I like hearing what people are reading. If there is someone who you consider to be successful, find out what books they've been reading, whether for inspiration or information, and it will tell you a little bit about them. It will tell you a little bit about the things that motivate them. And if you are trying to, follow a similar journey, it may be something that is informational for you, might inform some of the decisions that you are making. So yeah, I love a reading recommendation. I used to keep a list of book lists that were shared by celebrities. That was something that I enjoyed doing. There's a bookstore that I used to visit. I used to go to the Strand pretty regularly when I lived in Manhattan. I haven't been there in a while. I'm planning a visit soon. But I remember the Strand used to do that. They would set up a curation of books that were recommended by a celebrity. So there would be a table with the books that were on this celebrity's list of books that they keep on their nightstand or something. So I love that. I love getting a recommendation from someone, a celebrity or someone that I admire. His next rule is cool titles usually make for crappy books, and don't judge a book by its cover, but also you kind of should, because he said especially newer books, the cover will tell you something about the author, it tells you something about the leverage they had with their publisher, and it tells you who they think will like this book. I know book covers give you a lot of information about what a book is going to be about and who they think the target reader is going to be. I completely agree with that. But again, Holiday's background as a writer himself, as someone who is into marketing, I think his background, his perspective is a lot weightier about the industry and the bookish community than mine would be as a consumer. So his is as a producer, mine is as a consumer. We have very different takes on the industry where titles and covers are concerned. I don't know how much leverage an author has, especially like a new author, a debut novelist, someone who is writing. Um, yeah, I don't know how much leverage like a new writer or someone who is still new in the industry, how much say they have over what their book looks like. I think between their editor and their publishers, um, there there may be some changes that are not necessarily what the author would have liked, but they will go along with because that's how the book is going to get sold. That's how they're going to develop a following. So I don't know. I don't know that I can disagree with this as a rule, but I think it's interesting that Holiday is sharing his background in that way. He says, look for wisdom, not facts. We're not reading to just find random pieces of information. We're reading to accumulate a mass of true wisdom that you can turn to and apply in your actual life. And his next rule is linked to that. He says, when great readers read, they ask themselves a simple question: what do I plan to do with this information? I think that that is interesting because, again, Holiday's background is more of that inspirational genre of books. And that's not necessarily the kinds of books that everyone is seeking out. Um, and it doesn't mean that this is only about like nonfiction, self help, business type books. It is just any kind of reading. What do you want to do with this wealth that you have gained from reading? I think reading should definitely change your life. It should definitely change your actions. It should definitely change how you are, how you perceive the world, and how you respond to it. But I don't think that there are certain books that you have to have read in order to have that kind of change in your life. So whether or not these are rules, I don't know. His next rule, however, I find very interesting. He says, in every book you read, try to find your next one in its footnotes or bibliography. Again, I think this comes back to the kinds of books that you're reading and what your reason for reading them is. If you are trying to do a bit of a deep dive on a subject or a culture or a background, you will definitely get some resources from reading the footnotes or the bibliography if you want your next read to be something similar. So I read, if I read a history book, I'm reading about okay. So book that I read recently did a buddy read of McCullough's book on the Wright brothers. And in reading that, we learned some things about the historical records that um, the historical records of the Wright brothers' invention, and how some of what was put on display in a museum was changed while the Wright brothers were still around to dispute it, and that when there was an exhibit, and information was actually changed during the exhibit, but when it was put back into the permanent collection, it was changed back to reflect what it should have been. And that was something that I found fascinating because I'd never heard that before, and I wanted to do a little bit more of a study on the subject. So look through McCullough's bibliography, look through his notes to see where I could find other things, other documents, or other books that would be available that I could actually do a little bit of a deep dive on that subject. So, if you are reading a book and it makes you want to read more on that subject, then definitely you could get a resource from that author, whether it's something else that they have written or a book that they used for their research that you could now go and read. But that's assuming that you want to continue. If you want your next book to be completely different, then, or if just this book has satisfied your desire for reading about this topic, then I think that's the limit of this as a rule. So in every book you read, try to find your next one in its footnotes or bibliography. I think is limited based on how you relate to this subject. If this book or series of books that you have read make you feel like you know enough on this subject, and not that you should ever say you know enough, but that you're not, you don't really want to go any further in this kind of reading, then that's the limit. Anyway, let's move on. He says, when you find an author you love, read all the books they've written. I completely agree with that. Right now, I am doing a bit of a completist challenge on 3 authors. So I'm tracking them in my reading journal. These are 3 authors that I am following this year. Started following them a couple of years ago. I'm reading through the works of Toni Morrison, Barbara Pym, and Muriel Spark. And so I just took pictures of all of their novels because that's what I'm reading from these ladies, and trying to read everything that they've written because I enjoy their writing and I know what I want to get from this challenge. There are a few other authors that I want to do this with. There are some other novelists, but also some nonfiction writers who I want to read all their works because I want to explore the research that they have done and shared with the world on various topics. So I definitely recommend this as something to do as well. I don't know that there is one specific author that I would recommend for everyone. Of course not. Everyone should you should read the things that you love. And you may not want to follow an author and read all the books they've written because you may want to just um instead of following authors, you may want to follow topics or genres. But I like this as a rule for myself. I don't know how comfortable I would be telling you that this would be a rule for everyone. Anyway, Ryan's next rule is that if you see a book you want, buy it. Don't worry about the price. Reading is not a luxury. I disagree with that. Reading is not a luxury. Reading should be universal, but purchasing books is not the same as reading books. Again, with the assumption that everyone has the disposable income to purchase all the books they want, or all the books that they think would inform their lives, I think has this comes from this assumption that we all are equal in our purchasing power. And for there may be some of us who, even if we could afford books, we don't want to buy books. We would rather we don't want to buy We don't want to own books. We want to read books from the library and so on. So I think it's fine that this is Ryan's rule for himself, but I wouldn't tell anyone that they should buy a book or that they have to buy a book. I would say read the book. Reading should not be a luxury. Owning books can be. His next rule is that speed reading is a scam. You just have to spend a lot of time reading. I don't speed read. I read. I read for the most part. If I'm reading a book that I want to read and I'm comfortable reading, I'll read every word, and I read pretty slowly. Um, if there's a book that I'm not enjoying and I just want to get to the end, I will skim. I will skim. I have skimmed and I will skim, but not for books that I'm enjoying. Your aim as a reader is to understand why something happened. The what is secondary. He says, before I start a book, fiction especially, I almost always find a summary to get a sense of the plot and core themes. It saves me from spending half the book in the dark trying to figure out what's going on. This is completely against my own personal philosophy. I rarely read an entire book synopsis if it's a book that I want to read. I do not read or watch book reviews before I've read a book. If I'm going to read a book, I will avoid the reviews, I'll avoid the introduction, I'll avoid the synopsis. I want to read as much of the book as its own experience. So sometimes I will read like the first line or two of a synopsis just to maybe get a grasp on what the book generally is going to be about. Maybe a little bit of the setting will tell me whether this is a book that's set in the 1800s or it's a contemporary novel. It will tell me if the book is set in the Caribbean or if it is set in um, the mountains of Kilimanjaro. That for me is enough. I just I don't want to know what the book is about. I don't want to know the themes that I'm going to be discussing. I want to read the book. I want to experience it organically. I feel like that's the way the author intends for me to read it, not knowing what I'm going to find until I've found it. Sometimes book synopses give you just like way too much information, I think. Sometimes the synopsis can capture the general plot from page 1 to page 100, and I don't want to be reading that knowing what it's about. I could read a book knowing what the book is about, but not a book that I'm planning to read just for enjoyment. So I don't recommend that to anyone else. I don't read an introduction or foreword before I read the book. I'll read that after. And so I think it's the next rule on his list, which is no, I think it's later. He talks about reading the prefaces and so on. I definitely recommend that because I think a lot of the other, I think a lot of the other text that's printed in the book can give you a little bit more information on the book, but I think you should read that afterwards. That's what I do, and that's what I would recommend. If you read in a different way, then that's fine. If that's, how you want to read, but I wouldn't make that a rule for anyone. He says your nightstand should be ambitious. Don't just build a library, build an anti library, a stack of unread books that humbles you and reminds you just how much there still is to learn. So, what he calls the anti library, I guess I would call my physical TBR, the books that I own that I haven't yet read. And I love that I have a lot of books that I haven't yet read because I know that I always have something that I could pick up. I like that. So I don't just want to keep books that I have read and that I intend to reread. I also want to keep books around that I haven't yet gotten to, and I feel like, oh, I need to read. I need to read more. I need to read faster. I think that's motivating. So I recommend that you have books around that you haven't yet read. Um, if that is something that is stressful for you to have what you may consider to be too many unread books, or if you feel like it's not as motivating for you to have a lot of unread books around, um then definitely, attack your physical TBR the way you should, because I don't know that there is one set rule or one set right way for everyone. There are some people who may just want to have books that they have read and treasure around. They don't want to have unread books. So when a book comes in, they want to read it as soon as possible so that it's not unread on their shelves. I don't know what that's about because I've never felt like that. I like to own books. book I'm a book collector. and also a reader. So I want to own the book. I want to own the book. I also want to read the book. I might not have the time to read it right now. I may not be in the mood to read it right now, but I want to have it around for when that time comes to read it, because that's the intention. He says, read like a spy in the enemy's camp. Wisdom is wisdom. Take it from wherever it comes. And you should read books and writers you disagree with. I I don't know how you would know that the writer is someone you disagree with until you read their work. Um, and I don't necessarily seek out people who have differing opinions from me to read their books. So I don't agree with this rule. I do want to read for information. So if I'm reading and you're telling me something that I didn't already know, I'm curious. But if you're reading and I'm disagreeing with what you're saying because you're giving me an opinion and I don't agree with it, I don't know that I would necessarily seek out more of your books to read just because you disagree with me or I disagree with you. So I don't think I agree with that rule. He says, if you only find yourself underlining and agreeing with the authors you read, you're not reading diversely or critically enough. You should be arguing with the authors you read. You should know enough about the topic to spot when they are wrong too. Um, that's a little confusing to me because, again, if you're reading to learn from someone, how are you disagreeing with them? If if you're reading to hear what their opinion is of someone, of something, then they may have a different opinion because they have a different perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are wrong and you are right. So I don't know. That's those rules are a little confusing to me. But his next rule is don't be satisfied just getting the gist of things, go deep. And I like that as a principle. Again, I don't know if it's a rule because I encourage people to do deep dives into subjects and read more on a topic if you think it will help you to understand it better. But it's fine if you want to move on too. It's fine if you want to move on. Okay. Wow, I didn't know that you could switch these tabs. Something just happened on my computer that has never happened before. All right. Next rule is good things happen in bookstores. Some of my favorite books are just random things I grabbed at bookstores. That's what bookstores are for, what I've tried to build mine around. It's a discovery engine better than any algorithm. So I like the impulse shopping approach that he's talking about, where you can go to a bookstore and just grab something because it piques your interest. You've never heard about it, hadn't been recommended to you, and you can just pick it up, take it home, purchase it, take it home, and have a unique experience or an unexpected experience. And I like that. I don't I don't do that a lot because I don't buy a lot of books that I haven't heard about, but I definitely do that kind of impulse shopping, book shopping in the library. And I think the library is a great place to do this because you can go and experience things that you've never heard about and not have put out any money. So if you have a public library as a resource that is available to you, definitely recommend this. This would be a great rule if instead of bookstore we switched it to library, because the library the library system is one of the few places where you could still go with the and spend as much time and get as deep into the resources without the expectation that you have to spend any money. You walk into a bookstore and you spend a couple of hours in there browsing the shelves and you ask questions, you ask recommendations of the booksellers that you see, but there is some expectation that when you leave, you will have bought something. Whereas you go to the library and you can ask a librarian for recommendation, you can chat up every librarian who passes you by and ask them similar questions. And when you walk out with a bag full of books or movies, DVDs, or whatever kind of resource you take home, you have not spent any money. There's no physical, there's no exchange of currency other than your time. And so I definitely recommend that everyone uses the library system if they have the opportunity to. I know the library's not the same everywhere, but yeah, what Ryan's rule is for bookstore would be my rule for a library. Going back to something he spoke about earlier, where he said prefaces and forewords are there for a reason, don't skip them. They often have a ton of helpful and interesting stuff about the context around when the person was writing, who the work ended up influencing, and other tidbits that sometimes stick with you longer than even the work itself. I completely agree. I just say, read this after you've read the text, not before. Because if you want your experience to be as uninfluenced, as standalone as possible, you want to have your own experience before you are influenced by someone else's experience of the book. So that's all I would say about that. He says if a book is really good, recommend it and pass it along to other people. Definitely recommend this one, whether it is whether it is a book that you give to someone or share it with in a free library, or if you just come onto YouTube and make videos like this one, not necessarily this one, but other videos that I have made where I recommend books on a theme, or individual standalone reviews where I tell you about a book that I have loved and recommend that you check it out too. Um, if a book is really good, recommend it and pass it along to other people. Completely agree with that one. And I think that's the last one. He says, it's the last one that I follow the most. I'm proud of the books I've been able to champion and turn people on to over the years. So yeah, that is his final rule. And I think, wow, I spent an hour responding to these rules. That's why I couldn't make a video. It took a while to go through his 31 rules and to share my perspective on them. Thank you so much to the author for having shared these rules and giving us a place to have a conversation about books and how books what books make what books are in our lives, and how we relate to books as physical objects, as tools for learning, but also as a point for entertainment and for connection. Books are how a lot of us relate to each other. Books are why you're listening to me, watching me right now, because this is my bookish platform. This is my opportunity to talk with you about books and other things. So I definitely want to recommend everyone find the book that they want to read and read it. I recommend books to people, but I'm not upset when I share a recommendation with you and you don't take it. I love when I have heard that you've read a book that I've recommended and you've also had a good experience with it, and you come back and you tell me, oh, that book that you talked about, I read it and I loved it. Thank you so much for the recommendation. That is personally fulfilling to me. But like I said, everyone is on their own reading journey, and you should be. So if I recommend a book to you that spoke to me, it doesn't mean that it will be the time for you to read it, or even that it's a book that you will want to read ever. And that's fine too. I share the book, I share the recommendation, and it's for you to decide if you want to take it. But thank you so much for always telling me, giving me feedback on the books that I have shared and whether or not you've read them and how you feel about them. So I love hearing about that. I will I will update the description box of this video with the link to Dee Dee's video where she responded to Ryan's rules, as well as to the blog post that started all of this. And so thank you so much for watching this, and I look forward to hearing your comments. If you're watching this later, I look forward to hearing what you were doing when this video came to you, and whether or not you watched it all the way to the end. If you agreed with Ryan or if you agreed with my disagreement to some of his rules, would love to hear your feedback. So again, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I enjoyed this bit of a discussion, and I look forward to hearing and reading your comments and coming back on here another time and talking with you about more bookish things. So enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you have a lovely weekend to come, and I'll see you in the next video or next time we come on live, which hopefully will be on Monday. And I'll see you then. Until then, happy reading. Bye.